The cabin stood like a broken promise against the Montana wilderness, its windows black as dead eyes. Maya Chen pressed her hand to her swollen belly as February wind cut through her thin coat. 6 months pregnant, evicted last week, with $17 to her name, this inheritance was supposed to be her salvation. The key had been waiting for her at the law office in Whitefish, accompanied by a manila envelope containing a deed and a brief note. For Maya when the time comes. Grandmother Lily. Maya had never met Lily Chen, had only heard whispered fragments about the woman who disappeared from family gatherings before Maya was born. Her father never spoke of his mother, would only say she'd chosen solitude over sense and leave it at that. Now, standing in the doorway of the one-room cabin, Maya understood his silence. The place reeked of abandonment. Dust particles danced in the weak afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. A rusted wood stove dominated one corner, its chimney pipe askew. The few pieces of furniture, a small table, a chair with a broken leg, a narrow bed with a moth-eaten quilt, looked like they belonged in a museum of poverty. Maya's baby kicked, a sharp reminder of the urgency pressing against her ribs. The homeless shelter in Kalispell had a 3-night limit. She'd already burned through that grace period twice. Her ex-boyfriend Jake had made his position clear: no baby or no relationship. He'd chosen neither, disappearing the day after she'd shown him the positive pregnancy test. She pulled out her phone to check for job responses, but the screen showed no signal. Of course, even the universe seemed determined to isolate her here. The floorboards protested with every step as she moved deeper into the cabin. Maya began cataloguing anything potentially valuable. The wood stove might fetch $50 if she could figure out how to transport it. The antique oil lamp on the table could be worth something to collectors. She was calculating the value of the handmade quilt when her foot caught on an uneven board. Looking down, she noticed something odd. One section of flooring appeared different from the rest. The wood grain was lighter, less weathered. Maya knelt carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and ran her fingers along the edges. The board was loose. Using a butter knife from the cabin's meager kitchen supplies, she pried at the edges. The board lifted easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. Maya's heart hammered as she peered into the darkness. Her phone's flashlight illuminated a metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, nestled in the cavity. She lifted it out with trembling hands. The box was heavier than expected, made of brushed steel with a combination lock that had been left open. Maya sat back on her heels and slowly raised the lid. Inside, manila folders were stacked neatly alongside bundles of cash held together with rubber bands. Maya's breath caught. She pulled out one bundle and counted, $500 in 20s and 50s. There were at least 6 more bundles visible. But it was the photographs scattered beneath the money that made her stomach lurch. Black and white images of men in expensive suits, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Handwritten notes were clipped to each photo, dates, times, locations. Some photos showed the same men entering buildings, shaking hands, exchanging briefcases. Maya picked up one photograph. A tall man with silver hair stood outside what looked like a government building, his face partially obscured by shadow. The notation read, Senator Morrison, December 15, 1987, payment confirmed, nuclear waste site approved, despite contamination reports. Another photo showed the same senator with a different man, this one younger with sharp features. Morrison plus Blackwood Industries, $2.3 million. Yellowstone River mercury levels suppressed. Maya's hands shook as she rifled through more photos. Her grandmother had apparently spent years documenting what looked like a massive corruption scheme involving environmental cover-ups, illegal payments, and government officials. The evidence was damning and meticulously organized. At the bottom of the box lay a letter addressed to her in her grandmother's careful script. Maya, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have found yourself in desperate circumstances. I always knew this day would come. The money will help, but the documents are your real inheritance. These men are still alive, still powerful, still dangerous. They killed your grandfather when he threatened to expose them in 1988. They've been watching our family ever since, waiting to see if he told anyone what he knew. I've spent 30 years gathering proof of their crimes. Now it's yours to decide what to do with. Trust no one in law enforcement. Their reach extends everywhere. But if you're brave enough to use this evidence, you could ensure your daughter never wants for anything. Choose carefully. Grandmother Lily. Maya's blood turned to ice. Her daughter. The letter specifically mentioned her daughter, but Maya hadn't told anyone the baby's gender yet. The lawyer's office smelled of stale coffee and old leather, a combination that made Maya's already queasy stomach churn harder. She shifted in the worn chair, her hand instinctively moving to her barely visible bump as Mr. Henderson shuffled through a stack of yellowed papers. "I have to admit, Miss Chen, this came as quite a surprise to us as well," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your grandmother was very specific about the timing of this inheritance. The property was to be transferred to you only upon her death, and only if you were—" He paused, glancing at her midsection. "Expecting." Maya's throat tightened. She knew I was pregnant, but we hadn't spoken in 15 years. Evelyn had her ways of keeping informed about family. Henderson's tone suggested this wasn't the first mysterious bequest he'd handled. "The cabin sits on 43 acres in the Cascade foothills. Property taxes are current through next year. Here are the keys and the deed." The brass key felt surprisingly warm in Maya's palm, as if it had been clutched by another hand moments before. She studied the faded photograph Henderson slid across the desk, a modest log structure surrounded by towering Douglas firs, smoke curling from a stone chimney. "What's the catch?" Maya asked. Experience had taught her that windfalls always came with strings attached. "No catch, legally speaking, though I should mention your grandmother left specific instructions that you visit the property alone first. She was quite insistent about that detail." Maya pocketed the key and deed, thanking Henderson before stepping back into the October drizzle. The pregnancy hormones made her emotional, but she couldn't shake the feeling that grandmother Evelyn was orchestrating something from beyond the grave. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours through increasingly narrow roads. Maya's ancient Honda wheezed up the steep grades while she tried to piece together memories of her grandmother. Evelyn Chen had been her father's mother, a woman who'd never approved of his marriage to Maya's white mother. After Maya's parents died in the car accident when she was 12, Evelyn had barely acknowledged her mixed-race granddaughter's existence. The final mile was a rutted dirt track that Maya wasn't entirely sure her car would survive. When the cabin finally came into view, her heart sank. The photograph in Henderson's office must have been decades old. This structure looked ready to collapse, shingles missing from the roof, windows dark and grimy, the front porch sagging like a broken promise. Maya parked and sat in the gathering dusk, fighting tears. She'd fantasized about selling the property to pay for the baby's medical expenses, maybe even put a down payment on a real apartment. Instead, she'd inherited a liability. The key stuck in the warped front door, requiring her full weight to force it open. Inside, dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight filtering through dirty windows. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and what looked like 2 bedrooms down a narrow hallway. Everything was covered in sheets like ghosts of furniture. Maya pulled back one covering to reveal an ornate wooden chest, its surface carved with symbols that looked vaguely Asian. Another sheet hid a rocking chair that creaked when she tested it, as if protesting years of abandonment. She was heading toward the kitchen when the floorboard gave way. Maya's foot plunged through rotted wood up to her ankle. She yanked it free, grateful she wasn't hurt, and knelt to examine the damage. The hole revealed a dark space beneath, and when she shined her phone's flashlight down, something metallic glinted back at her. Heart pounding, she worked at the loose boards with her fingers until she'd created an opening large enough to reach through. Her hand closed around something cold and rectangular. She pulled it up into the light and gasped. It was a small metal box, about the size of a paperback book, with a combination lock. The metal was tarnished but solid, and it felt heavier than its size suggested. Something rattled inside when she shook it gently. Maya sat back on her heels, staring at the box. Why would her grandmother hide something under the floorboards? And why leave her a property with such specific instructions about visiting alone? The rational part of her mind whispered warnings about getting her hopes up. The box probably contained old family photos or worthless mementos. But as she traced the combination lock with her finger, Maya felt a flutter of possibility that had nothing to do with the baby moving inside her. Outside, the wind picked up, sending tree branches scraping against the cabin's walls like skeletal fingers. Maya realized she'd lost track of time. Full darkness had fallen while she'd been exploring. She should head back to town, find a motel room, return in daylight to assess the property properly. Instead, she found herself walking to her car to retrieve the emergency supplies she always carried, a flashlight, some snacks, and a blanket. The baby deserved answers about the family legacy, even if that legacy was hidden in a crumbling cabin in the middle of nowhere. The floorboard creaked ominously under Maya's weight as she shifted her position, phone pressed to her ear. Through the static-filled connection, her friend Jess's voice sounded tinny and distant. "You're where exactly?" Jess asked, clearly struggling to hear over the poor reception. "About 2 hours north of the city. Middle of nowhere, basically." Maya glanced around the cabin's dim interior, shadows dancing in the weak afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. "The place is falling apart, but there might be some decent wood I can salvage." "Maya, honey, you're 7 months pregnant. Maybe climbing around in some decrepit old shack isn't the best." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone screen. No signal. She'd had 1 bar when she arrived, but even that had vanished. The isolation pressed in around her like a physical weight. She pocketed the phone and returned her attention to the loose floorboard that had caught her notice. The wood was rotted along one edge, creating a gap just wide enough for her fingers. When she'd stepped on it earlier, it had given way slightly, revealing a hollow space beneath. Maya knelt carefully, her rounded belly making the position awkward. She worked her fingers under the board's edge and pulled. The wood came away easier than expected, releasing a musty odor that made her wrinkle her nose. Dust motes swirled up in the disturbed air. The space beneath was larger than she'd anticipated. Not just the typical crawl space between floor joists, but a deliberately constructed hiding place. Her heart quickened as she peered into the shadows. Something was down there. She pulled out her phone again and activated its flashlight. The LED beam revealed a metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, sitting in the hollow. Its surface was tarnished but appeared intact, protected from moisture by what looked like a plastic tarp that had been carefully wrapped around the hiding spot. Maya's grandmother had been a secretive woman, even before their family's falling out. Helen Blackwood had been the type to keep cash hidden in coffee cans and important papers stuffed in random books. But this seemed different, more intentional. The baby kicked sharply against Maya's ribs as she reached down, making her gasp. "Easy there, little one," she murmured, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Mama's just checking something out." The box was heavier than expected, with something shifting inside as she lifted it. She settled back against the cabin wall, cradling it in her lap. No lock, just a simple latch that opened with a soft click. Maya's breath caught. The box was filled with photographs, documents, and what appeared to be several thick rolls of cash held together with rubber bands. But it was the photograph on top that made her hands tremble. Her grandmother as a young woman, maybe 25, standing next to a man Maya didn't recognize. They were both smiling, his arm around her waist in an intimate gesture. But Helen was wearing a wedding dress. Maya's mind raced. Her grandmother had never married. That had been family gospel. Helen Blackwood, the spinster aunt who'd raised Maya's father after his parents died, who'd lived alone in this remote cabin for decades. Yet here was undeniable evidence to the contrary. She set the photograph aside and examined the documents underneath. Marriage certificate dated 1962. Helen Blackwood and Robert Chen. Chen, that wasn't a name Maya recognized from any family stories. Below that, a birth certificate that made her stomach drop. A daughter. Helen had given birth to a daughter in 1963, just a year after the marriage. Sarah Elizabeth Chen. Maya's father had been born in 1965. He'd always believed he was Helen's only family, the nephew she'd reluctantly taken in after his parents' accident. But according to these documents, he'd had a sister, an older sister Helen had never mentioned. The cash rolls beneath the papers were substantial, more money than Maya had ever seen in one place. Dozens of $50 and $100 bills, enough to solve her immediate financial crisis and then some. But the implications of the photographs and certificates overshadowed any relief about money. Where was Sarah Chen now? Why had Helen hidden all evidence of her marriage and daughter? And why had she left all of this for Maya to find? A sound outside made Maya freeze, the crunch of tires on gravel. She scrambled to the window, still clutching the metal box. A dark sedan was pulling up the overgrown drive, moving slowly and deliberately. The windows were tinted, too dark to see inside. Maya's heart hammered as she watched the car come to a stop. No one else should know she was here. She'd told Jess the general area, but not the specific location. The property was so remote that stumbling across it accidentally seemed impossible. The engine cut off, and the silence that followed felt ominous. Maya realized she was completely alone, with no cell signal and no way to call for help. The loose floorboard lay open beside her like an accusation, and the secrets of her grandmother's hidden life suddenly felt less like a discovery and more like a trap. Maya's hands trembled as she knelt beside the gaping hole in the cabin floor. The metal box sat before her like a sleeping beast, its surface dulled by decades of moisture but showing no signs of rust. Whatever it was made of, it wasn't ordinary steel. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her mounting anxiety. She pressed one hand to her belly while the other hovered over the box's simple latch mechanism. No lock, just a weathered brass clasp that looked like it had been opened and closed countless times. "Okay, little one," she whispered. "Let's see what Grandma Ruth was hiding." The latch gave way with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled leather, were stacks of documents, photographs, and something else that made Maya's breath catch. Bundles of cash. Old bills, but not ancient. The top bundle showed 20s from the early 2000s. But it was the photographs that made her stomach drop. The first few seemed innocent enough. Her grandmother as a younger woman, maybe in her 40s, standing beside a black sedan. But Ruth wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit had his arm around her waist, his face partially obscured by shadow. Maya flipped to the next photo, then the next, watching her grandmother age gradually through the images while the men around her changed faces but kept the same aura of barely contained menace. Maya's hands found a manila envelope thick with documents. Her eyes scanned bank statements, deposit slips, and what appeared to be business correspondence. The amounts made her dizzy. Regular deposits of $5,000, sometimes $10,000, spanning nearly 3 decades, all flowing through accounts she'd never heard Ruth mention. Then she found the letters. The first was typed on letterhead for something called Northern Enterprises. No address, just the company name and a phone number she didn't recognize. "Ruth, the Detroit situation has been handled as discussed. Your assistance was invaluable as always. The usual arrangement applies. Confirm receipt. M." Maya's mouth went dry. She rifled through more letters, finding similar cryptic messages spanning years, references to arrangements and situations and packages delivered. One letter from 1998 made her blood run cold. "The Brennan problem won't surface again. Your information about the dock workers made all the difference. Payment as promised is in the usual location. You've earned our continued trust. M." Brennan. Maya remembered that name from old newspaper clippings she'd found in Ruth's belongings. Tommy Brennan, a union leader who disappeared in 1998. The case had never been solved. She fumbled through more documents. finding what appeared to be a ledger in Ruth's careful handwriting. Names, dates, amounts of money, and brief notations: shipment delayed, collected penalty, new route established, bonus earned, problem eliminated, full payment received. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya realized she was hyperventilating. She forced herself to breathe slowly, trying to process what she was seeing. Her grandmother, the woman who'd baked cookies for church fundraisers and knitted blankets for the homeless shelter, had apparently been involved with some kind of criminal organization for decades. But it was the final document that shattered everything. A letter addressed to Maya herself, written in Ruth's familiar handwriting but dated just 6 months ago, long after they'd stopped speaking. My dear Maya, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found my insurance policy. I know you think poorly of me for cutting ties with your mother, but there are things about our family you've never understood. Things I did to keep us all safe. The money here is clean. I made sure of that. It's for you and your child. But be careful who you trust. Some secrets have a way of following you, and the people I worked with don't forgive easily. There's more you need to know, but not here. Check the old well behind the cabin. And Maya, whatever you think of me, know that everything I did was to protect the people I loved, even when they couldn't love me back. Grandma Ruth. Maya stared at the letter until the words blurred. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers demanding entry. The shadows seemed deeper now, more threatening. She looked at the money again, then at the photographs of her grandmother with men who looked like they belonged in FBI wanted posters. $30,000. Enough to pay her medical bills, secure an apartment, maybe even start the college fund she'd dreamed of. But at what cost? The metal box sat on the kitchen table like an accusation, its tarnished surface catching the weak morning light filtering through grimy windows. Maya had barely slept, her mind churning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she saw the newspaper clipping again. The headline, the date, the implications that made her stomach twist. She'd made coffee with the last of her grounds, nursing the bitter brew while staring at the box. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, responding to her elevated stress levels. At 7 months pregnant, every emotion felt magnified, every decision weighted with consequences she couldn't fully grasp. The smart thing would be to call the police, turn over whatever else might be hidden in that box and walk away. But Maya had learned long ago that doing the smart thing often meant staying poor, staying powerless, staying exactly where life had placed you. Her phone buzzed against the table. Another text from Derek, landlord, called. 3 weeks, Maya. That's all the extension he'll give us. 3 weeks to find first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit for a new place. 3 weeks before she and Derek would be sleeping in his beat-up Honda with winter approaching. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing the urgency. Maya's fingers traced the edge of the metal box. Whatever secrets her grandmother had buried here, they'd stayed hidden for decades. A few more hours wouldn't matter. She opened the lid. Beneath the newspaper clipping lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly smeared but still legible. Maya lifted them carefully, noting the return address, Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital, dated between 1962 and 1964. The first letter was addressed to my dearest Elizabeth, her grandmother's name. Maya's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The treatments continue, though I cannot say they bring me closer to forgetting. Dr. Henning insists the memories are fabrications, symptoms of my condition, but I know what I saw that night. I know what happened to James Morrison, and I know why they want me to forget. The Morrison family has money, influence. They cannot afford the truth. Maya's breath caught. James Morrison, the name from the newspaper headline, the missing person whose disappearance had never been solved. She read on, her coffee growing cold as the letters painted a picture of her grandfather Thomas, confined to a psychiatric hospital after claiming to witness a murder. Each letter to her grandmother grew more desperate, more paranoid, yet strangely coherent. He wrote about seeing James Morrison killed during a business deal gone wrong, about trying to report it to police who wouldn't, listen to a drunk Irish labourer accusing the town's most prominent family. The final letter was different, shorter, written in a shakier hand. Elizabeth, they're releasing me next week. Dr. Henning says I've made progress, that I've accepted my delusions for what they were. I've learned to tell them what they want to hear, but you must know, I remember everything. I've hidden proof where only you would think to look. If something happens to me, if I disappear like James did, you'll know where to find it. Look for the place where we carved our names that summer before I shipped out. Look deep. Maya set the letter down, her mind racing. She'd never heard stories about her grandfather beyond the basic facts, dead when she was a child, troubled by drink, and what people whispered was madness. Her grandmother had never spoken of him, changing the subject whenever Maya asked questions. The carved names. She remembered seeing them during her first exploration of the cabin, two hearts etched into the wall of what looked like a root cellar behind the house. At the time she'd thought it was sweet, a romantic gesture from simpler times. Now it felt ominous. Maya struggled to her feet, pregnancy making her movements awkward. The baby seemed to sense her agitation, pressing against her ribs in a way that made breathing difficult. She grabbed the flashlight from her purse and headed for the back door. The root cellar was partially collapsed, its wooden door hanging at an angle. Maya had to duck to enter, the flashlight beam dancing across stone walls and packed earth floors. The carved hearts were easier to find now that she knew what to look for. TK plus M 1943, enclosed in two overlapping hearts about 3 feet from the ground. Maya knelt awkwardly, running her hands over the wall below the carving. The stones here felt different, looser, as if they'd been removed and replaced. She worked her fingers into the gaps, pulling at the rocks until one shifted, then another. Behind the stones was a gap just large enough for her hand. Maya reached inside, her fingers closing around something smooth and cool, glass. She pulled out a mason jar, its contents hidden by decades of dust and grime. Through the murky glass, she could make out what looked like photographs and another rolled paper. Her grandfather's insurance policy, hidden for over 50 years. Maya's hands shook as she unscrewed the lid, knowing that whatever she found inside would change everything. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted the metal box from its hiding place, the weight of it surprising her. The rusted lock had long since corroded, and the lid opened with a reluctant groan that seemed to echo through the silent cabin. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth that had somehow survived decades of moisture, lay a collection of items that made her breath catch in her throat. Photographs. Dozens of them, black and white images that spoke of a time when cameras were precious and every picture deliberate. But these weren't family portraits or scenic landscapes. These were surveillance photos, grainy shots of men in expensive suits entering buildings, license plates captured in stark detail, faces circled in red ink with question marks scrawled in the margins. Beneath the photographs, a leather journal bound with string contained her grandmother's careful handwriting. Maya opened it, squinting in the lantern light to make out the faded ink. The entries weren't dated in any conventional way, instead marked with cryptic notations: shipment 47, contact verified, payment received, location compromised. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her mounting anxiety. Maya pressed her free hand to her belly, trying to calm both herself and her unborn child as she continued reading. The journal entries painted a picture she'd never imagined possible. Her quiet, church-going grandmother had been involved in something that required careful documentation of people's movements, payments that came with risks, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be regular communication with individuals identified only by initials. A loose piece of paper fell from between the journal pages, and Maya caught it before it could flutter to the floor. It was a letter, written in her grandmother's hand, but addressed to someone named Vincent Torino. The content made Maya's stomach lurch. The situation has become untenable. Local law enforcement is asking questions, and I cannot guarantee the security of our arrangement much longer. Consider this my formal notice that I will be ceasing all operations effective immediately. The location will be sealed, but I trust you understand that insurance policies must remain in place for the protection of my family. Maya read the letter 3 times before the implications began to sink in. Her grandmother hadn't been an innocent victim caught up in something beyond her control. She'd been an active participant, someone with enough leverage to make demands and negotiate terms with people who operated outside the law. The next item in the box made her hands shake even more violently. Bank statements, photocopied and meticulously organized, showing regular deposits that dwarfed anything her grandmother could have earned from her small pension. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars flowing into accounts Maya had never known existed, dating back nearly 30 years. At the bottom of the box, wrapped separately in a piece of silk that had somehow retained its deep blue color, lay a small silver key. No markings, no identifying features, just a simple key that looked like it might open a safety deposit box or perhaps a locker. Attached to it with a piece of thread was a tiny paper tag with an address written in pencil, 1247 Commerce Street, Unit 23B. Maya sat back on her heels, her mind racing as she tried to process what she'd discovered. Her grandmother, the woman who'd taught her to bake cookies and sing hymns, had apparently been involved in activities that generated enough money to change everything about Maya's current situation. The inheritance she'd thought worthless might actually be the answer to her prayers or the beginning of her worst nightmare. The wind outside picked up suddenly, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the cabin that had nothing to do with the temperature. Maya looked toward the door, suddenly paranoid that someone might have followed her here, might know what she'd found. The isolation that had seemed peaceful hours earlier now felt dangerous, exposing her to threats she couldn't identify or understand. She carefully returned everything to the box except the key and the address, which she slipped into her jacket pocket. Whatever her grandmother had been involved in, whatever secrets these items represented, Maya knew she couldn't make any decisions tonight. She needed time to think, to research, to understand the full scope of what she'd inherited along with this remote cabin. But as she replaced the loose floorboard and scattered debris over it to hide any sign of disturbance, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. The innocent hope of finding enough salvageable materials to help with her mounting bills had been replaced by something far more complex and potentially dangerous. The baby moved again, a gentle rolling motion that reminded her why she'd come here in the first place. Whatever her grandmother had done, whatever compromises she'd made, Maya had her own choices ahead of her now, choices that could secure her child's future or put them both in danger from people who might still consider the secrets in that box worth protecting. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she stared at the familiar face looking back at her. Her grandmother, Eleanor, stood beside a man Maya had never seen before, both of them smiling in front of what appeared to be the very cabin she now sat in. But it wasn't the couple that made her heart race. It was the date scrawled on the back in faded ink, July 1962, 3 months before her father was supposedly born. Maya set the photograph aside and reached for the bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. The paper felt fragile between her fingers as she unfolded the first one. The handwriting was masculine, urgent. My dearest Eleanor, I cannot bear another day of this charade. The child grows restless, and I fear what will happen when he's old enough to ask questions. We agreed this was temporary, but it's been nearly 2 years. How much longer must we pretend he isn't ours? The letter was signed simply with the initial J. Maya's hands shook as she reached for another letter, this one in her grandmother's careful script. James, you know as well as I do that there's no other way. If anyone discovers the truth about what happened that night, about what we found, everything we've built will crumble. The boy is safe here with me. That's what matters. The money continues to arrive as promised, and I've made sure he wants for nothing. Trust me. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs, as if sensing her distress. She pressed her palm against her belly, trying to process what she was reading. Her father had been raised by Eleanor, but these letters suggested he wasn't her biological child either. So whose child was he? She fumbled for the next letter, dated several months later. Eleanor, they're getting closer. I saw Henderson asking questions at the bank yesterday about our accounts. If they trace the money back to its source, they'll want to know why we've been sending payments to a woman in the mountains. Burn everything. Move the boy if you have to, but destroy any evidence that links us to what happened at the mine. Maya's blood ran cold. The mine. The same mine where her father claimed to have no memory of his early childhood, where he'd refused to take her hiking as a girl because the area gave him bad feelings. She reached for the metal box she'd found beneath the floorboards, her fingers finding the small brass key that had been hidden with the letters. The lock turned easily, revealing contents that made her stomach lurch. Inside lay a child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. Stick figures scattered around what looked like a cave opening, red crayon splashed across the page like blood. At the bottom, in a child's shaky handwriting, the day everyone went away. Beneath the drawing was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline made Maya's vision blur. 7 miners killed in collapse at Copper Creek mine. 2 bodies never recovered. The date matched the timeline of the letters. Maya's phone buzzed, startling her from her horrified trance. Connor's name flashed on the screen. "Maya, thank God. I've been worried sick. Did you make it to the cabin okay?" She opened her mouth to tell him everything, but something held her back. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through years of financial struggle, whispered caution. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just tired from the drive. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said, about the cabin and your grandmother. I did some research, and Maya, there are some things about your family's history up there that might interest you." Her grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of things?" "Property records, for starters. That cabin wasn't your grandmother's only holding. She owned several parcels of land around the old Copper Creek mine. And there's something else. Insurance payouts from 1962, substantial ones." Maya stared at the newspaper clipping in her lap, her mind racing. "Connor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you said you were interested in buying this place, was it really for the cabin?" The silence on the other end stretched too long. "Connor?" "Maya, I think we should talk in person. There are things about your family, about that land, that you need to know, and I don't think you should be up there alone." The line went dead. Maya looked around the cabin with new eyes, suddenly aware of how isolated she was, how far from help. The shadows seemed deeper now, the silence more oppressive. She gathered the letters and photographs, shoving them back into their hiding place beneath the floorboards. Her father's childhood drawing remained in her hands, the crude red marks seeming to pulse in the lamplight. 7 miners dead, 2 bodies never found, and somehow her family was connected to it all. The baby kicked again, and Maya whispered a promise to her unborn child. Whatever secrets lay buried here, she would uncover the truth. Even if it destroyed everything she thought she knew about who she was. The old woman's journal trembled in Maya's hands as she read by the flickering light of the oil lamp. Each page revealed another layer of secrets that made her stomach churn with something beyond morning sickness. Her grandmother hadn't been the bitter recluse Maya's mother had always described. She'd been desperate, hiding something that had consumed 40 years of her life. March 15th, 1983, he came again today, asked about the girl. I told him what I always tell him, she's safe and that's all he needs to know. But his eyes are different now, hungrier. I fear what he might do if he ever finds out the truth about what really happened that night. Maya's finger traced the faded ink, her heart hammering against her ribs. What girl? What night? The entries jumped around in time, some pages torn out entirely, leaving jagged edges that spoke of someone trying to control a narrative that kept threatening to spill over. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin's windows with an intensity that made the whole structure groan. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and turned the page. October 2nd, 1983. Found footprints around the cabin this morning. Size 11 boots, same tread pattern as before. He's getting bolder. Margaret says I should tell them everything, but she doesn't understand what that would mean for all of us. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. The money helps, but it's blood money. Every dollar feels heavier than the last. The money. Maya's breath caught as she remembered the cash hidden beneath the floorboards. Blood money, her grandmother had called it. Payment for silence about something terrible enough to warrant decades of hush money. A sudden crash from outside made Maya jump, the journal sliding off her lap onto the floor. She grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The old oak tree had lost another branch, this one large enough to block part of the driveway. But in the brief illumination of lightning, she saw something else that made her blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks in the mud. Recent enough that the rain hadn't completely washed them away. Someone had been here tonight. Maya's hands shook as she checked the shotgun's safety and moved through the cabin, checking locks and peering out windows. The isolation that had felt like peace yesterday now felt like a trap. No cell service, no neighbors for miles, and someone knew she was here. She retrieved the journal from the floor, desperate to understand what she'd stumbled into. The next entry was dated only 6 months ago, written in the shaky handwriting of an elderly woman whose hands could barely hold a pen. He's dying. After all these years, cancer is finally taking him. Part of me feels relief, but Margaret's daughter is asking questions. She found some of the old newspaper clippings I thought I'd burned. What happens when he's gone and there's no one left to keep the others quiet? What happens to the girl's daughter? What happens to her baby? Maya's vision blurred as the words sank in. Her grandmother had known about the pregnancy. But more than that, she'd been protecting Maya from something. Someone who'd been circling like a vulture for decades. The girl's daughter, Maya's mother, which meant the girl in the entries was Maya's aunt, a sister her mother had never mentioned. Her mind raced through family conversations, trying to remember any hint of another relative, but her mother had always insisted they had no family beyond each other. Another entry, this one dated just 2 months ago. Margaret is gone now. Heart attack, they said, but I wonder. Too convenient, too clean. I'm the last one left who knows the whole truth. Found out about Maya's situation through old Mrs. Henderson at the post office. Poor girl doesn't know what's coming for her. Doesn't know why her mother really ran, doesn't know about the others who disappeared when they got too close to the truth. I have to make sure she's protected, but I'm running out of time. The journal entry ended there, but tucked between the pages was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Maya's hands trembled as she unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn map of the property with several locations marked with red X's. At the bottom, in her grandmother's careful script, insurance policies. Use only if they come for you. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the mountain itself. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya heard something that made her skin crawl. The distinct sound of footsteps on the cabin's front porch. Slow, deliberate steps. Someone trying to be quiet. Maya grabbed the shotgun and the bag of money, her mind racing. The map showed a root cellar behind the cabin and what looked like an old mine entrance up the hillside, places to hide, places her grandmother had marked as insurance policies for exactly this moment. The footsteps stopped directly outside the front door. Maya held her breath, watching the door handle slowly turn. The manila folder felt heavier than it should have as Maya spread its contents across the cabin's kitchen table. Hospital records, birth certificates, and what looked like legal documents created a paper constellation under the flickering overhead light. Her hands trembled as she reached for the first page, a birth certificate dated 37 years ago. Her mother's name was there, but everything else felt wrong. The hospital wasn't the one her mother had always mentioned. The attending physician was someone Maya had never heard of. Most disturbing of all was a handwritten note clipped to the corner. Emergency C-section, patient hemorrhaging, baby transferred to NICU immediately. Maya's breath caught. Her mother had never mentioned complications during birth. In fact, she'd always described Maya's delivery as routine, even boring. "You were in such a hurry to get here," she used to say, "practically delivered yourself." The next document made her stomach clench. A death certificate for an infant dated 3 days after the birth certificate. Baby girl Thompson, her mother's maiden name before marriage. Cause of death, complications from premature birth. Maya stared at the paper until the words blurred. This couldn't be right. She was very much alive, sitting here reading about her own supposed death. Unless... She grabbed her phone and called her mother, not caring that it was past 10 o'clock. "Maya? Honey, is everything okay? You never call this late." "Mom, I need to ask you something about when I was born." Maya tried to keep her voice steady. "Were there any complications? Any problems at all?" A long pause. Too long. "Why are you asking?" "Maya, you're scaring me. Just tell me the truth. Please." Another pause, then a shaky breath. "Where are you, Maya?" "I'm at Grandma's cabin. I found some papers." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, then immediately called back. It went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times with the same result. Her hands shaking now, Maya returned to the documents. There was a newspaper clipping from the same week as the birth and death certificates. "Local woman dies in car accident, newborn survives." The article was brief, mentioning a single car crash on a remote mountain road during a snowstorm. The woman's name was Jennifer Walsh. 22 years old, no known relatives. Maya's blood turned to ice as she read the final line. The infant was transported to Regional Medical Center in stable condition. The same hospital where, according to the birth certificate, Maya Thompson had been born and died. She fumbled through more papers, finding what looked like handwritten letters. Her grandmother's spidery script covered page after page. "Margaret, I can't keep lying to her. Maya deserves to know the truth about where she came from. That girl who died in the accident, Jennifer, she was just a baby herself. And Maya's real baby died the same night Jennifer's was born. I know what we did seemed right at the time, but..." Maya dropped the letter as if it had burned her. The words swam before her eyes as their meaning sank in. Her mother had lost a baby. Another baby, a living one, had lost its mother. And somehow, in the chaos of that snowy night 37 years ago, someone had made a decision that would echo through decades. She wasn't Maya Thompson. She was Maya Walsh. Or maybe she wasn't Maya at all. The baby inside her kicked, as if responding to her racing heartbeat. Maya pressed both hands to her belly, suddenly feeling unmoored from everything she thought she knew about herself. Her medical history, her family health records, even her understanding of why she looked nothing like either of her parents. It was all built on a foundation of lies. But worse than the deception was the growing realization of what this meant for her grandmother's hidden money. If it had been Jennifer Walsh's, if her grandmother had somehow taken it from the accident scene along with a dying woman's baby, then Maya wasn't inheriting anything. She was the daughter of a thief. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Maya quickly gathered the papers, her heart hammering as she tried to decide where to hide them. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the door. 3 soft knocks echoed through the cabin. Maya held her breath, clutching the documents to her chest. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here tonight. Her mother's phone was turned off, and the way those footsteps had moved, careful, measured, suggested someone who didn't want to be heard approaching. The knocks came again, more insistent this time. Through the gap beneath the door, Maya could see a shadow blocking the porch light. Someone was standing right outside, waiting. The silence stretched until Maya could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears. Then, just barely audible through the old wooden door, came a voice she'd been dreading to hear. "Maya? I know you're in there, sweetheart. We need to talk." The newspaper clippings scattered across Maya's kitchen table like fallen leaves, each one containing a piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't stop reading. The dates span 3 decades, chronicling a series of art thefts that stretched from San Francisco to New York, with stops in Chicago, Denver, and Phoenix. Her grandmother's maiden name appeared in the margins of several articles, not as a suspect, but as someone who had been questioned, a person of interest. Maya's hands trembled as she held up a photograph from 1987 showing a younger version of her grandmother outside a Chicago courthouse, her face partially obscured by a raised hand. Eleanor Whitfield, questioned in connection with the theft of Vanderberg's Morning Light from the Meridian Gallery, Maya read aloud to the empty kitchen. Whitfield claimed no knowledge of the painting's whereabouts, but acknowledged having dated the gallery's security supervisor. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs, as if responding to the revelation. She pressed her palm against the spot, trying to calm both herself and the life growing inside her. Everything made terrible sense now. The expensive paintings hidden beneath rotting floorboards, the cash, the cabin's remote location. Her grandmother hadn't been an innocent woman scraping by on Social Security. She'd been part of something much darker. Maya's phone buzzed. Detective Morrison's name flashed on the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was dealing with. The front door creaked open, and Maya quickly swept the newspaper clippings into a pile. "Mom?" she called out, her voice catching slightly. "Just me, sweetheart." Her mother appeared in the doorway, grocery bags in her arms. "I picked up some of that ginger tea you like." Linda's eyes immediately went to the papers on the table. "What's all this?" Maya considered lying, but exhaustion won out. Research about Grandma Eleanor. Linda set down the groceries with deliberate care, her movements suddenly rigid. "What kind of research?" "The kind that explains where she really got her money." Maya held up one of the clippings. "Did you know the police questioned her about stolen artwork? Multiple times?" The color drained from her mother's face. She sank into the opposite chair, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. "Maya, I can explain." "You knew. It wasn't a question." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You knew what she was involved in, and you didn't think to mention it when I inherited the cabin?" "It wasn't like that." Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother never told me details. She helped people sometimes. People who needed art returned to its rightful owners." "Rightful owners?" Maya stared at her mother in disbelief. "She was a thief, Mom. These articles are talking about millions of dollars in stolen paintings." She was trying to make things right. Linda reached across the table, but Maya pulled her hands back. During the war, so much art was stolen from Jewish families. Your grandmother worked with a network of people who tried to return pieces to their descendants. Sometimes the only way to get them back was to take them from museums and private collections that had acquired them illegally. Maya's mind raced. And the money? Rewards. Grateful families who paid for the return of their heritage. Linda's eyes pleaded for understanding. She wasn't getting rich off this, Maya. She was spending her own money on research, travel, bribes to get information. The rewards barely covered her expenses. Then why hide everything? Why the secret compartment? Linda was quiet for a long moment, because not everyone saw it the way she did. To the authorities, theft is theft, regardless of the motivation. And there were dangerous people involved. Collectors who paid good money for pieces they thought were legitimately acquired. People who didn't appreciate having their purchases questioned. The baby moved again, and Maya realized she was holding her breath. Is that why she and Dad didn't get along? Why she stayed away from our family? Your father thought she was a criminal. He couldn't understand the difference between stealing for profit and stealing for justice. Linda's voice cracked. She stayed away to protect us. To protect you. Maya looked down at the photograph of her grandmother again, seeing the woman's face in a new light. Not a criminal hiding from cameras, but someone caught between worlds, trying to do right while being hunted by those who saw only the breaking of laws. "The paintings upstairs," Maya said slowly. "They're not random stolen art, are they?" Linda shook her head. "They're pieces she was working on returning. She must have been getting close to finding the rightful families when she died. The weight of responsibility settled on Maya's shoulders like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just inheriting money, she was inheriting her grandmother's unfinished mission, along with all the dangers that came with it. The sound of boots on gravel cut through the morning air like a warning. Maya pressed herself against the cabin wall, her heart hammering as Sheriff Coleman emerged from his patrol car, his face grim with purpose. Behind him, a second vehicle pulled up, a sleek black sedan that looked entirely out of place in these woods. Through the dusty window, Maya watched two men in dark suits exit the sedan. Federal agents, she realized with growing dread. This wasn't a courtesy call about noise complaints or building permits. They knew. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movement. Whatever happened next, she had to protect more than just herself now. The metal box sat hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the back room, but even that felt too close, too exposed. The knock came firm and official. "Miss Chen, this is Sheriff Coleman. We need to speak with you." Maya forced herself to breathe, smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked pale but composed. Opening the door, she manufactured what she hoped passed for casual surprise. "Sheriff, is everything all right?" Coleman's weathered face was apologetic but determined. "Maya, these are Agents Morrison and Vale from the FBI. They'd like to ask you some questions about your grandmother's property." The taller agent, Morrison, stepped forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Chen, we're investigating some irregularities related to your grandmother's estate. May we come in?" Maya's mind raced. Refusing would only raise suspicions, but letting them inside felt like inviting wolves into the henhouse. "Of course, though I'm not sure how much help I can be. I barely knew my grandmother." The agents filed into the small living room, their eyes already scanning, cataloging, searching. Vale moved toward the kitchen while Morrison remained focused on Maya, his gaze sharp and calculating. "We understand you've been renovating," Morrison said, noting the scattered tools and exposed floorboards. "Found anything interesting during your work?" "Just rot and mouse droppings, mostly." Maya settled into the worn armchair, projecting calm while her pulse thundered. The place was pretty neglected. Sheriff Coleman shifted uncomfortably. "Maya, I'll be straight with you. There are questions about your grandmother's activities in the years before she died, financial irregularities that suggest she might have been involved in something questionable." Vale emerged from the kitchen, shaking his head slightly at Morrison. Nothing there. But Maya caught the way his eyes lingered on the hallway leading to the back room. They were working systematically, she realized. They'd get there eventually. "My grandmother was a recluse," Maya said carefully. "I couldn't tell you anything about her finances or activities. We weren't close, my mother made sure of that." "Family feuds can be complicated," Morrison agreed, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying her ignorance act. "Still, sometimes family members stumble across things unexpectedly. Old documents, hidden items, things that previous generations thought were safely tucked away." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing Maya's tension. She winced slightly, a hand moving instinctively to her side. Morrison's eyes tracked the gesture with interest. "When are you due?" he asked, his voice taking on a deceptively gentle tone. 3 months. Maya's protective instincts flared. They wouldn't use her pregnancy against her. They couldn't. "Must be expensive, preparing for a baby," Vale commented casually, rejoining the conversation, "especially for someone in your situation." Financial pressure can make people consider options they might not normally explore. The implication hung heavy in the air. They were suggesting she might have found something valuable and was planning to sell it, no questions asked. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. Sheriff Coleman looked increasingly uncomfortable with his companion's tactics. "Maya, if you did find something, anything, it would be better to come clean now. These things have a way of surfacing eventually, and cooperation goes a long way." Maya met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there. Coleman had known her since she was a teenager getting into trouble at the general store. He didn't want to see her in serious legal jeopardy, but his presence here also meant the investigation was serious enough to warrant local cooperation. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but there's nothing to come clean about." Maya stood, hoping to signal the end of the conversation. "I'm just trying to fix up the cabin enough to make it livable." Morrison rose as well, his smile sharp. "We'll need to take a look around, if you don't mind, just to verify that everything's in order." It wasn't really a request, and they all knew it. Maya nodded slowly, her mind frantically calculating. The metal box was well hidden, but these men were professionals. If they brought in dogs, metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar— "Of course," she said. "Though I should mention, some of the floorboards are loose. Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." Morrison's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval at her subtle defiance. The hunt was officially on. Maya's hands trembled as she held the faded photograph, the faces staring back at her feeling both familiar and foreign. The woman in the center bore an unmistakable resemblance to her grandmother, but younger, softer somehow. Beside her stood a man Maya didn't recognize, his arm protectively around a small girl who could only be her mother. "This doesn't make sense," Maya whispered to herself, sinking into the cabin's only remaining chair. According to everything she'd been told, her grandfather had died before her mother was born. Yet here he was, clearly present in what appeared to be a family portrait. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. Maya rubbed her belly absently, her mind racing through possibilities. Had her mother lied about her father's death? Had grandmother concealed the truth for decades? A loose floorboard creaked beneath her feet, drawing her attention back to the hidden compartment, where she'd found the photograph. She knelt carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and peered into the dark space. Her fingers found more items, letters tied with string, a small jewelry box, and what felt like another book. The letters were addressed to her grandmother in a man's handwriting, dated years after her grandfather's supposed death. Maya's heart pounded as she read the first one. "My dearest Eleanor, I know you think what I did was unforgivable, but I had no choice. The people I owed weren't the type to negotiate. Leaving was the only way to keep you and little Sarah safe. I think about you both every day." Maya's breath caught. Sarah was her mother's name. She fumbled for the next letter, this one dated 3 years later. "Eleanor, I've enclosed what I can spare this month. I know it isn't much, but my new identity doesn't pay well. Please tell Sarah her daddy loves her, even if she can never know where I am." The pieces began forming a terrible picture. Her grandfather hadn't died, he'd abandoned his family, running from debts or worse, and her grandmother had covered for him, creating the fiction of his death rather than explain his betrayal. But why keep the letters? Why maintain this shrine to a man who'd destroyed their lives? Maya reached for the jewelry box, its tiny hinges protesting as she opened it. Inside lay a wedding ring and a brass key she didn't recognize. Beneath them, a note in her grandmother's careful script. "For Maya, when she's old enough to understand that sometimes the people we love make choices that break us, but we love them anyway." Tears blurred Maya's vision. Her grandmother had known she'd find these things, had planned for it even, but understanding her grandmother's pain didn't ease Maya's growing sense of betrayal. How many other family secrets lay buried in these walls? The final item was indeed another book, a ledger filled with numbers and dates spanning decades. As Maya flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged. Regular entries, always the same amount, continuing long after her grandfather's letters had stopped. Someone had been making payments to her grandmother for years. The last entry was dated just 6 months ago, shortly before her grandmother's death. Maya's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from an unknown number: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Her blood turned to ice. Someone was watching her, had been watching her, someone who knew about her discoveries and wanted them to remain buried. She struggled to her feet, suddenly aware of how isolated the cabin was, how vulnerable she was here alone. The late afternoon shadows seemed longer now, more menacing. Every creak of the old wood made her heart race. Maya gathered the letters and photographs, stuffing them into her bag with shaking hands. She needed to get back to town, needed to think clearly about what all this meant. But as she reached for the door, another text arrived. She pressed her back against the door, mind racing. The money, could it be connected to the cash she'd found? Was this mysterious benefactor the source of her grandmother's hidden wealth? And what exactly were they paying to keep secret? Her phone rang, the sudden sound making her cry out. An unknown number again. Maya stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the answer button. Every instinct screamed at her not to pick up, but she needed answers. "Hello?" she whispered. "Maya." The voice was older, male, gravelly with years of cigarettes. "I think it's time we met. Who is this?" A long pause. Then, "Someone who's been taking care of your family for a very long time. Someone who knew your grandmother better than anyone." Maya's legs felt weak. "Are you your grandfather?" "No, child. But I'm the reason he had to disappear. And I'm the reason your grandmother never wanted for anything." The sheriff's cruiser disappeared down the dirt road, leaving Maya standing in the cabin's doorway with trembling hands pressed against her swollen belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress, and she whispered a soft apology to the life growing inside her. 3 days. That's how long Sheriff Morrison had given her to get her affairs in order before he returned with a warrant. 3 days to figure out why her grandmother had hidden a fortune in stolen jewelry beneath these rotting floorboards, and why Maya's own mother had never breathed a word about any of it. She turned back into the cabin, her eyes falling on the metal box that had started it all. The lid gaped open like a wound, revealing the empty velvet compartments where the jewelry had nestled for God knew how long. Only one piece remained, a simple silver locket she'd instinctively hidden in her pocket when the sheriff arrived. Maya pulled it out now, running her thumb over the tarnished surface. The engraving was worn but still visible, "For my darling Rose, with all my love," her grandmother's name. She fumbled with the tiny clasp until it clicked open, revealing a photograph so small she had to squint to make out the details. 2 women stood side by side, arms linked, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. One was clearly her grandmother. Maya recognized the sharp cheekbones and defiant chin she'd inherited. The other woman was a stranger, elegant in a way that spoke of money and privilege, wearing what looked like the same sapphire earrings Sheriff Morrison had catalogued from the jewelry collection. Maya's phone buzzed. Her mother's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment Maya considered letting it go to voicemail. But 3 days wasn't enough time to unravel 60 years of family secrets on her own. "Maya, sweetheart, I've been thinking about you all morning. How are you feeling?" Her mother's voice carried that particular brand of forced cheer that Maya had learned to recognize as worry. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Maya settled heavily into the cabin's only chair, the wood creaking under her weight. "What do you know about Grandma Rose's past?" The silence stretched too long. Maya could hear her mother's careful breathing, the sound of her choosing her words. "Why would you ask that, honey? You know your grandmother and I weren't close." "Because the police were here, Mom. Because I found things in this cabin that don't make sense. Expensive things that apparently don't belong to our family." Maya's voice cracked. "I'm 7 months pregnant, I can barely afford groceries, and now I'm being investigated for receiving stolen property, so please just tell me what you know." Another pause, shorter this time, followed by a sigh that seemed to carry decades of weight. "Your grandmother never talked about her life before your grandfather. Said the past was better left buried." Her mother's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "But there were always rumors in town. Stories about her showing up here in the early 1960s with nothing but the clothes on her back and a car that was too nice for someone claiming to be destitute." Maya clutched the locket tighter. "What kind of stories?" "People said she'd been involved with a wealthy family downstate. The Ashfords, they owned half the automotive suppliers in Detroit back then. There was talk of a scandal, something that got hushed up real quick." Her mother paused. "Maya, where exactly did you find these things?" hidden under the floorboards in a metal box. Maya stared at the photograph in the locket, studying the elegant stranger's face. "Mom, do you know anything about someone named Ashford?" The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told Maya everything she needed to know. "Oh, honey, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I don't know," Maya admitted, her free hand moving protectively over her belly. "But I have 3 days to figure it out before Sheriff Morrison comes back with a warrant. These people, the Ashfords, are they still around?" "The old man died years ago, but his son Richard still runs the business." "Maya, if this involves the Ashfords, you need to be very careful. They're not the kind of people who let things go." A car door slammed somewhere outside, and Maya's heart jumped into her throat. Through the grimy window, she saw an unfamiliar black sedan parked next to her beat-up Honda. A man in an expensive suit was walking toward the cabin, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mom, I have to go," Maya whispered into the phone. "Maya, what's wrong?" "Someone's here." She snapped the locket shut and slipped it back into her pocket as footsteps approached the front door. "I think the Ashfords just found me." The sheriff's station felt like a tomb at 3 in the morning. Maya sat in the hard plastic chair, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Detective Harrison sat across from her, his weathered face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. "Tell me again about the phone call," he said, his voice gentle but persistent. Maya's throat felt raw from repeating the same story. It was a woman's voice. She said, "If I didn't stop digging, I'd end up like my grandmother." "And you didn't recognize the voice?" "No." Maya shifted uncomfortably, her lower back aching. The baby had been restless all night, responding to her elevated stress levels, but there was something familiar about it. Like I should know who it was. Harrison made another note in his pad. Through the window behind him, Maya could see the first pale hints of dawn creeping across the horizon. She'd been here for hours, going over every detail of the threatening call, the break-in at the cabin, the discovery beneath the floorboards. "Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, are you certain about what you found under those boards?" Maya's jaw tightened. "You think I'm making this up?" "I think you're under a lot of stress. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we're dealing with grief and financial pressure." "I know what I saw." Maya's voice rose, then she forced herself to calm down. Getting angry wouldn't help. The jewelry, the documents, they were real. Someone took them. "Right, about that." Harrison flipped through his notes. "I spoke with your grandmother's attorney again. According to him, Eleanor Chen lived very modestly. Her estate consisted primarily of the cabin and about $3,000 in savings. No mention of valuable jewelry or documents." Maya stared at him. "That's impossible. She had to have told someone about what she was hiding, or maybe she didn't tell anyone because there was nothing to tell." The implication hung in the air between them. Maya felt her chest tighten with frustration and exhaustion. She'd barely slept in days, and the constant stress was taking its toll. But she knew what she'd seen. The emerald necklace, the bearer bonds, the photographs. They'd been real. "What about the break-in?" she pressed. "Someone destroyed the cabin looking for something. Could have been vandals or addicts looking for something to steal. The cabin's been empty for months. It's a natural target." Maya wanted to scream. Instead, she took a shaky breath and tried a different approach. "Detective, my grandmother was terrified of something before she died. The neighbors said she'd become paranoid, suspicious. People don't act that way for no reason." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not dismissing your concerns entirely, but I need evidence, not speculation. If someone really broke into that cabin and stole valuable items, they left no trace, no fingerprints, no witnesses, no proof the items ever existed in the first place. So, that's it? You're not going to investigate?" "I'll keep the case open, but without more to go on." He shrugged helplessly. Maya felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. She struggled to her feet, her movements clumsy with pregnancy and exhaustion. "Fine, I'll figure it out myself." Mrs. Chen, I strongly advise against that. If there really is someone dangerous involved in this, you could be putting yourself and your baby at risk. She was already walking toward the door. Someone already threatened me, detective. At least if I investigate myself, I might actually get answers. The drive back to town was a blur of anger and determination. Maya's mind raced as she tried to piece together what she knew. Someone had definitely been in that cabin. The destruction was too thorough to be random vandalism, and the threatening phone call proved that someone was watching her, taking her investigation seriously even if the police wouldn't. The question was who? Who had known about her grandmother's secret? Who had access to the cabin? And most importantly, who felt threatened enough by Maya's discovery to break in and steal everything? As she pulled into the parking lot of the motel where she'd been staying since the cabin became uninhabitable, Maya noticed a familiar car in the lot. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the dark sedan that had been parked across from the diner yesterday when she'd met with the attorney. Someone was definitely watching her. Maya sat in her car for several minutes, studying the sedan. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but she could make out the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call the police, then stopped. What would she tell them? That someone was sitting in a public parking lot? Taking a deep breath, Maya gathered her courage and stepped out of her car. It was time to confront whoever was stalking her, regardless of the consequences. The floorboards creaked beneath Maya's feet as she descended into the cabin's basement, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. 3 weeks had passed since she'd first discovered the metal box, 3 weeks of sleepless nights and careful planning. Now, with Detective Morrison's investigation closing in and her bank account bleeding what little remained, she had no choice but to confront what lay hidden in the deepest corner of her grandmother's secrets. The basement felt different this time, smaller, more oppressive. The musty air carried something else now, something that made her skin crawl. She'd avoided this space since finding the photographs and documents that revealed her grandmother's double life. But tonight, desperation drove her forward. Her beam swept across the stone walls until it landed on what she'd missed before, a loose stone, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Maya pressed against it, feeling it give way with a grinding sound that seemed to echo through her bones. Behind it lay a cavity, and within that cavity another box. This one was different, older, heavier, wrapped in oiled cloth that crumbled at her touch. Inside she found what she'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure, stacks of bearer bonds, their edges yellowed with age, but their value still intact. Enough money to secure her child's future, to pay for the medical care she couldn't afford, to finally breathe again. But beneath the bonds lay something that made her blood freeze. A birth certificate, her mother's birth certificate. Only the name wasn't Sarah Chen, as Maya had always believed. It was Sarah Volkov, and listed as the father was a name that sent ice through her veins. Dmitry Volkov, wanted by the FBI for war crimes and arms dealing. The phone rang upstairs, its shrill tone cutting through her shock. Maya climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, the birth certificate trembling in her hands. "Maya?" The voice belonged to Detective Morrison, but it carried an urgency she hadn't heard before. "Where are you right now?" "At the cabin." "Why?" "Listen to me very carefully. Lock your doors and don't open them for anyone. We've been monitoring communications, and there are people heading your way. People who know about what your grandmother was hiding." Maya's free hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her child had been moving restlessly all evening, as if sensing her fear. "What people? What are you talking about?" "Your grandmother wasn't just hiding money, Maya. She was hiding evidence. Evidence that could bring down a network that's been operating for decades. And now they know you've found it." Through the cabin's front window, Maya saw headlights cutting through the forest darkness. 2 vehicles, moving slowly, deliberately. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "They're here," she whispered into the phone. "There's a back way out, through the kitchen. I'm 15 minutes away, but you need to run. Now." Maya grabbed the box of bonds and shoved the birth certificate into her jacket pocket. As she moved toward the kitchen, she heard car doors slamming, voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but that sounded harsh, urgent. The back door stuck, swollen from recent rains. Maya threw her shoulder against it just as the front door exploded inward. Heavy footsteps thundered across the living room as she stumbled into the night air, the box clutched against her chest. The forest behind the cabin was a maze of shadows and tangled undergrowth. Maya ran blindly, branches tearing at her clothes and face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, flashlight beams swept through the trees, growing closer. Her foot caught on a root and she went down hard, the box flying from her arms. Bearer bonds scattered across the forest floor like fallen leaves. Maya scrambled to gather them, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the paper. There! The voice was accented, angry. The beam of a flashlight found her crouched among the trees. Maya abandoned the scattered bonds and ran deeper into the woods, her only thought to protect the life growing inside her. She could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind her, their pursuit relentless. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder. Detective Morrison had arrived, but would it be in time? Maya burst through a thicket and found herself at the edge of a steep ravine. The darkness below was absolute. Behind her, the footsteps drew closer. She had nowhere to run. "Please," she called out to the night. "I'm pregnant. I don't know anything." A man emerged from the trees, gun drawn, his face hidden in shadow. "You know enough," he said in heavily accented English. "Your grandmother made sure of that." The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. Maya closed her eyes and made a choice that would change everything. The sheriff's cruiser pulled away, leaving Maya alone with the echo of gravel crunching under tires and the weight of Deputy Chen's warning still ringing in her ears. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. We'll have a unit patrol the area." The red taillights disappeared into the darkness beyond the pine trees, and suddenly the cabin felt smaller, more isolated than ever. Maya's hands trembled as she turned the deadbolt, then dragged a kitchen chair against the door for good measure. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her panic. She pressed her palm to her belly, trying to project calm she didn't feel. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Someone had been watching her. Someone knew about the money hidden beneath the floorboards. Someone who might very well be connected to whatever dark secrets had driven her grandmother to live like a hermit for 30 years. She moved to the living room window and peered through the curtains. The porch light cast a weak yellow circle that barely reached the edge of the clearing. Beyond that, the forest was an impenetrable wall of black. Anything could be hiding out there. The house creaked around her, settling into the night, but every sound made her jump. She needed to think, to plan. Deputy Chen had made it clear that the sheriff's department couldn't provide round-the-clock protection. She was on her own. Maya's gaze fell on the loose floorboard where the money still lay hidden. $300,000 that could change everything for her and the baby if she lived long enough to use it. The thought sent a chill down her spine. She knelt carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and pried up the board. The metal box sat in its makeshift grave, innocent-looking despite the chaos it had already brought into her life. She lifted it out and carried it to the kitchen table, where the overhead light would give her the best view. Inside, beneath the stacks of bills, her fingers found something she had missed before in her earlier shock at discovering the money. A small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the first page in careful script. "If someone is reading this, then the past has finally caught up with me." Maya's breath caught. She turned the page, her eyes racing over the words. "I should have told Maya's mother the truth years ago, but I was a coward. I thought if I disappeared, if I cut all ties, it would keep them safe. I was wrong." The next entry was dated 3 months ago. "They've found me. I saw the car again today, the same black sedan that's been circling the property. I know what they want, but I'll die before I tell them where it is. The money is Maya's birthright, payment for what they took from our family." Maya's hands shook as she flipped through more pages, finding fragments of her family's history she'd never known. Her grandmother hadn't always lived in isolation. Once, she'd been married to a man named Vincent Torino. The name meant nothing to Maya, but her grandmother's words painted a picture of a woman who'd discovered too late that her husband was involved with dangerous people. Vincent thought he was so clever, skimming from his employers. He never told me where the money came from, but I wasn't stupid. When they killed him, they came for me next. They wanted their money back, but Vincent had hidden it too well. Even I didn't know where it was until I found this cabin, until I found his final gift. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. The porch light flickered, casting moving shadows across the window. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly closed the journal and shoved it into the box with the money. The footsteps stopped at the front door. Maya held her breath, waiting. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then came 3 slow knocks, polite and patient, which somehow made them more terrifying than if someone had tried to break the door down. "Maya?" A man's voice, calm and reasonable. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, trying to stay out of sight of the windows. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her spiking adrenaline. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice continued. "I just need what belongs to my employers, what your grandmother stole from us. Give it back, and you can walk away from this. You and your baby can have a normal life." The casual mention of her baby made her blood run cold. They'd been watching her long enough to know everything about her situation. "I know this is scary," the man said, his tone almost sympathetic. "But hiding won't help. We found your grandmother, after 30 years. How long do you think you can run?" The gun trembled in Maya's hands as she faced the man who claimed to be her grandfather. The yellow light from the single bulb cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, making him look more like a spectre than family. Behind him, the wooden crates filled with stolen artifacts seemed to pulse with their own dark energy. "Put that down, child," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand enough," Maya replied, though her voice cracked. "You're a thief, a murderer. And you killed my grandmother." He stepped closer, seemingly unafraid of the weapon pointed at his chest. "Elena died because she was stubborn, just like you're being now. She could have lived out her days in comfort if she'd just kept her mouth shut about the past." Maya's mind raced back to the letter she'd found, her grandmother's desperate words about protecting the family's secret. She was going to turn you in, wasn't she? That's why you killed her. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Turn me in? Girl, she was as deep in this as I was. Where do you think the money came from to buy this land? To build this cabin? Your precious grandmother helped me move these pieces for 30 years before she developed a conscience." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Everything she thought she knew about her grandmother crumbled in an instant. The woman who had raised her mother, who had been described as kind and gentle, was a criminal. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I? Check the dates on those shipping receipts. Cross-reference them with your grandmother's travel records. She made monthly trips to the city, didn't she? Always came back with new clothes, new jewelry. Said she had a wealthy friend who gave her gifts." Maya's arm began to ache from holding the gun steady. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Her grandmother's mysterious wealth. The expensive items that seemed out of place in the rustic cabin, the locked basement that no one was supposed to enter. "Elena only got cold feet when your mother started asking questions," he continued. "Started worrying about what kind of legacy she was leaving behind. That's when she became a liability. So you poisoned her." He shrugged, the casual gesture more chilling than any threat. "Easier than you'd think. A little something in her tea. She went to sleep and never woke up. Peaceful, really." Rage flared in Maya's chest, hot and consuming. "Peaceful? She died thinking she was protecting us, died feeling guilty about what you'd done." "What we'd done," he corrected. "And now you have a choice to make. You can walk away from this place, take what you need from those crates, and disappear. Start fresh somewhere new with enough money to raise that baby properly. Or you can be noble and stupid like your grandmother and end up the same way. Maya felt the baby kick, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. The money from selling just one of these artifacts could change everything. She could afford proper medical care, a safe place to live, everything her child would need. All she had to do was become complicit in theft and murder. "There's a third option," she said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "I turn you in and let the police sort out the rest." He moved faster than she expected for someone his age. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next he was lunging toward her, his hand closing over the gun barrel. They struggled, Maya's pregnant body making her movements clumsy and slow. The weapon discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. He twisted the gun from her grip and stepped back, breathing heavily. Now she was the one staring down the barrel of a weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You really are Elena's granddaughter," he panted. "Too proud for your own good, too righteous to see the bigger picture." Maya's eyes darted around the basement, looking for an escape route. The stairs were behind him, no other way out except through him. "You know what the irony is?" he asked, raising the gun to point directly at her heart. "Elena thought she was protecting your family's honor by trying to confess. But your family never had any honor to begin with. Your great-grandfather was a con man. Your grandfather ran numbers for the mob. This is what we are, Maya. This is what you are." She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling her child move restlessly. "Maybe that's what we were," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But it doesn't have to be what we become." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Pretty words. They'll look nice on your headstone." The sound of footsteps on the floor above made them both freeze. Someone else was in the cabin. Maya's hands trembled as she held the final photograph, the one that had been buried deepest in the metal box. Her grandmother stood beside a younger version of Detective Harrison, both of them wearing police uniforms from decades past. The handwritten note on the back read, "Partners in justice, partners in silence. Rose and Michael, 1987. "She was a cop," Maya whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. Harrison nodded slowly from across the cabin's main room, his weapon lowered, but still ready. "Detective Rose Chen was the best partner I ever had. She went undercover to expose a drug trafficking ring that had corrupted half the department. When she disappeared, I thought they'd killed her. But she didn't disappear," Maya said, understanding flooding through her. "She ran. She took the evidence and ran. The money downstairs, it's not drug money, is it?" Maya's voice was barely audible. "It's evidence money. Marked bills from a sting operation that went sideways. Rose grabbed it when she realized how deep the corruption went. She was supposed to meet me that night, but she vanished instead." Harrison's weathered face showed decades of pain. "I've been looking for her ever since." Maya's baby kicked hard, as if responding to the revelation. She placed her hand on her belly, thinking of the woman who had raised her mother, who had lived in isolation for 30 years to protect a truth that could have destroyed lives. "The men who came here earlier," Maya said, "they weren't looking for drug money, they were looking for evidence that could still destroy them. Marcus Webb and Tony Castellanos. They were rookies back then, but they were deep in Vincent Moreau's pocket. Moreau ran the biggest distribution network in the state, and when Rose's investigation threatened to expose everything, they helped him disappear." Harrison finally holstered his gun. "They've been searching for Rose ever since, knowing she had enough evidence to put them away forever." Maya thought of the journals she'd found, her grandmother's meticulous documentation of names, dates, and transactions. She kept records. Everything is documented downstairs. That's what they're afraid of. Webb made detective. Castellanos runs security for 3 city council members. They've built lives on that cover-up, and Rose's evidence could topple it all. The sound of approaching vehicles made them both freeze. Through the cabin window, Maya could see headlights winding up the mountain road, multiple vehicles moving fast. "They're coming back," she breathed. Harrison was already moving, checking his ammunition. How many ways out of here? The back trail leads down to the creek, but I'm 7 months pregnant. I can't run through those woods in the dark. You won't have to. Harrison pulled out his radio, but static was all that answered his call. No signal. They're jamming communications. Maya's mind raced. Her grandmother had survived here for 30 years, had stayed hidden from people who wanted her dead. There had to be something she was missing. She hurried to the kitchen, pulling open drawers frantically. In the last drawer, taped to the bottom, she found what she was looking for, a small device that looked like an old garage door opener. "What is that?" Harrison asked. Maya pressed the button. Immediately, lights began flashing outside, positioned throughout the trees around the cabin. A recorded message began broadcasting from hidden speakers. "This property is under federal surveillance. You are being recorded. Leave immediately or face prosecution." Harrison stared in amazement. Your grandmother was still working the case. She never stopped being a cop, Maya realized. She was just working alone. The approaching vehicles slowed, then stopped. Maya could see figures moving in the darkness, confused by the sudden lights and warnings. "It won't hold them for long," Harrison said. "But it might be enough." Maya was already gathering the evidence from the hidden room. Journals, photographs, financial records, everything her grandmother had preserved. "There's a storage unit key downstairs." She said there was more evidence there. "We need to get you and that evidence to the federal building. There are agents there who can protect you." "What about my mother? If these men realize I have everything, your mother will be safer once this evidence is public. Right now, you're the only threat to them." Maya sealed the documents in a waterproof bag, the weight of 30 years of hidden truth heavy in her hands. Her grandmother had sacrificed everything to preserve justice, had lived in isolation to protect not just evidence, but the future it could secure. As they prepared to leave through the back trail, Maya took one last look around the cabin. This place had seemed like her salvation when she'd inherited it, and in a way it still was, just not how she'd expected. The baby kicked again, and Maya smiled grimly. Her child would grow up knowing the truth about their family, knowing that sometimes justice required sacrifice, but that it was always worth fighting for. "Ready?" Harrison asked. Maya nodded, following him into the darkness, carrying her grandmother's legacy toward the light.